Welcome back. Welcome back. Welcome back, everybody, to another chapter of Hazardous Technology and the Minds Who Make It. Written by Ukulele Villain and read by yours truly, Free Wada. We are back here today literally as soon as I hear my cat's auto feeder go off. So I thought someone who sounded exactly like me was attacking me in my own house potentially. Yeah, that's just the way we live. But other than that, back into the Arcane news, we had a lot going on last time. It was the end of part 3. Everything is just getting closer and closer. I can feel it to that final amalgamation of shit is gonna hit the fan. We had a lot of notes to go through. Silco's kind of like we built up Silco into this part. We've had Powder and Echo going together, realizing something is wrong with Vi. Maybe wrong with Vi, or maybe she's just changed at the end. Learning that Victor may be changing as well to escape. But is escape really the end for him? We're going to have to find out. Let's jump right back on into it, into our intermission after our chapter notes. For this chapter, hey gang. So we are entering the end game of the narrative. It's been great writing for you all, and I am diligently getting ready for potential future stories while I wrap up this next one. Next chapter will open up with some backtracking technically. Fun fact, Arcane's timeline is all over the place. Who knows how long it takes to get anywhere in this city? And my note to you, local ukulele villain, if you have any more stories, which it seems like you do, I will be more than happy to read them. If you're more than happy with me reading them yourself. I see all if this is where I'm starting with the stories, I can only imagine we'd go anywhere but up from here. So let's jump on into it with our third intermission, our third and final intermission. Silco's perspective. His brother had tried to drown him. Silco reflected on this from passing second to passing second. It was the foundational bricks that laid the groundwork to the haunted body he inhabited. This house, that was him, was either a tomb or a god. As the current leader of the Lanes, he felt like a chthonic being. So perhaps he lived in the form of both. Him and Vander had not been brothers by blood. Something stronger had tied them together. They had been dreamers, down in the mines that Piltover required they work on. Not required exactly. No, just cajoled and left with no other opportunity. There had never been enough to go around down among the orphans and the whores and the ones topside had abandoned. So he and Vander had dreamed. There was no shortage of these old phantasmagorical hopes when they were fueled by resentment and anger. High five on myself, I got that first try. But after their initial failures, Vander had grown complacent and sated by Piltover promises. The dream of their own nation was a cost too much for him, but the placebo was acceptable if there was no visible sacrifice or uncomfortable losses. Vander had ruled the lanes from the last drop and kept the separation of the topsiders and those in the trencher districts as a deal between the old Sheriff Grayson. He pretended to be king, and Silco was forced to walk the earth like a vagabond. His brother, once a dreamer, had died and been replaced by a puppet who enjoyed the minuscule peace he had constructed. Tying himself to a dying colonial power had killed the true Vander. That was his true murderer. And he had adopted a quartet of children too. 2 boys and 2 girls to flatter his ego and constantly prescribed wisdoms and platitudes. Until, well, everything had come down around them. And apparently, one of the daughters' deaths had been greatly exaggerated. Silco shouted towards Sevica, who was piloting the motorcade. Sevica yelled something back at him, and Silco barely perceived. They were moving over harsh potholes and barely constructed streets to get to Singe's laboratory in the Shimmer plant. Vi believed herself clever and in control of the facility, but she had no idea how many tunnels led to her little hideout, or how many of her men were actually still working under the fear of death at his hands. The motorcade they had been in, a gift from a Kimbaran named Cross, an older Zaunite who claimed he was born only a century after the sun gates were built, and who dressed like a strange rotary comm device. Like most of the other barons, the man loved his luxurious and strange fashions. Initially, Silco had scoffed at the technological bribe from the half-senile idiot in the form of a motorized carriage. He preferred to walk the streets he owned. Now, he was grateful. They hadn't had much time before the girl laid out in the back seat, forcing Silco to kneel before her on the motorcade floor, expired from the world, and took the hopes of Zahn with her. Sevica was pushing the vehicle's motor to the brink. Silco could imagine her taking out a lash and beating the side of it like an unruly stallion. Sevica had them moving faster than the devils of hell. "What if she's there?" Sevica asked, while making a 180 spin and taking them down a series of rock-like stairs. There was no way the vehicle was meant for these maneuvers, but under Sevica's hand, it persisted. Excuse me, I got a tickle in my throat. Much better. "She won't be. She's fled across the bridge." Silco let the last part trail off as he stroked Vander's daughter's forehead. The girl was suffering from explosive burns, and a few times she began to try and speak. The second daughter was also flinching in agony and nightmarish pain while mumbling the whole time. "It appears that Violet has abandoned a winning hand for the second time." Violet. 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 Exactly like Vander. Silco, like most of Vander's victories after their split, had allowed Violet to believe many wonderful and easy lies. Yes, there were members of the Undercity who adored her, and yes, she had betrayed him. But Vander had taught her everything she knew. Silco had the exact same education. Violet was simply the host for Vander's old soul and his old ways, so of course Silco knew her better than she knew herself. He looked down at the abandoned sister again. Her braided hair was coming undone, and the glasses perched on her nose were smashed beyond repair. She was an unlucky child, with all the anger, but none of Vander's touch. She again began to form words in the hazy half-life. Vi. He stroked her head again. "It's okay. She's gone now, child." She wouldn't settle. Victor. She gurgled the name, blood rising in her throat from internal damage. Silco cursed and turned her on her side. They rushed from the vehicle upon arrival, and when they located the elevator hatch reserved solely for dealings outside of Violet's purvey, Silco had to carry the young scientist in his arms. She stopped shifting and became deathly still as the lift descended deep towards the cavern area under the river. Sevica was eyeing him with her usual disgruntled look. Silco snapped at her, and Sevica responded curtly. "You're really going to take in another of Vander's kids?" Unsaid, laid from her other complaints before Silco. Vander's death had left behind a curse upon them in the form of Hextech. Therefore, his children could only carry that curse in their lineage as well. Powder. No, that's not quite right. The children and Vander's clients allegedly called her something else before they called her a martyr. She was a bit of a nuisance before death made her quiet. They called her the Little Jinx. Yes, hexes and jinxes. The Arcane was everywhere. The Jinx had none of Vander's lessons or pride. The Jinx strangely only had a disgust for Piltover and a loyalty to the scientist that Violet had taken. Silco could use that. In fact, he could almost sympathize with that. Stay alive, girl. The lift opened to singed strange laboratory glowing in an iridescent green light. The place had every hallmark of the disgraced. Piltover's chemist's tastes and aesthetics. Glass beakers filled with the bubbling liquids, strange open texts, and botanical flowers growing in the sanitized safety of a miniature coffin greenhouse. Silco had mixed feelings on the location. Here was where he had been introduced to his dependency on Shimmer, and where he had found the love of the water that had once claimed his life. A story of contradictions at its core. Singed was not alone either. That was somehow stranger to Silco than the otherworldly levitating object to the bench. The assistant to Jace Talus, who had inadvertently been the second domino pushed by Violet, was laid out on a medical slab like Silco had once been when he had given up his eye for the sake of wisdom and Zone. The man, really, to Silco he was a boy, sat up, and there was a moment of recognition. Foolish child, don't try it. The frail boy was not afraid. Instead, he made a swift motion off the medical slab. His arm and leg had been modified, but not like Violet's augmented arms. The sinewy, purple muscle interwoven with his flesh had grown from him. It was more like Silco's eyes than the swords and slings built into his comrades. The boy moved with brutal grace, perhaps to attack, or perhaps not. Whatever he intended, he did not achieve. Sevica had been Silco's guard for a decade, and before that she had also been Vander's. The people of Zone whispered of these men's wrath in the streets, and Sevica was the woman who gave those ghost stories weight. She easily grabbed the boy's wrist, insistent like a dance partner, and maneuvered him backwards with a twist of his wrist and a kick to his other, unmodified leg. The knockback was enough to start the boy coughing up blood and Shimmer, but he still raised his head and was about to make a suicidal bid at the woman who had been brawling in the streets since she was a small girl. "Victor!" Singe did not yell. Instead, he snapped like a disappointed teacher. "They are on our side." Victor was only focused on the rapidly fading woman in Silco's arms. His eyes gleamed in the green light with purple shimmer still freshly running through him. Silco held tight to his patience. "My reputation precedes me, boy. But I promise, this is not my doing." He took note of Singed as well. The boy before him could be used as a lever to control Singed and the Jinx. Silco doubted that saving the girl's life would inspire any loyalty. It might even generate resentment. "She's been calling your name. I simply brought her by her own request." And he said it. The Jinx breathed out a cry. The modified Zon scientist was pierced at the hook of this moment. A look of pure agony crossed his features and began to reach for the girl in Silco's arm. Silco pulled back from Victor. "You've already wasted what little time she has left. Listen to your mentor. Move aside." He then moved the girl to the medical slab where the boy had once been, and Singed started to pull out the gurney, the one with the harsh leather straps. This made the boy angrier, as he was now beside Silco, cradling the girl's head in against his chest. Victor looked at Singed. "Can you save her?" "I can, but the process will be taxing. Her injuries are severe, and she could be suffering from internal bleeding. Sometimes death is a mercy." That's what Vander had considered it, a mercy killing. All the angels and weak-willed servants like Benzo the traitor had begged for Vander to either leash the devil that was Silco or kill him once and for all. How could an abrupt ending ever be a mercy? Silco interjected. "The girl can take it. Candidly, you made her into something better, boy." Silco and Victor shared a look. He realized that the Piltover charity case must have never been complimented before on his teachings of the girl. Of course not. Topside would never let him eat the fruits of his labor. He knew not his worth as her guardian or as a creator of Hextech. But Victor shook his head, breaking the connection, and Silco found himself disappointed. He simply wanted to awaken the children of Zon, but they turned from him like he was a false prophet. Silco grabbed the boy's wrist, the one that had been modified by Singed, and shook it. "You think you can go back up there like this? Look out towards the river where the monsters lay. You've learned an important lesson, but you still refuse to accept it. That is why we will win. Power, real power, doesn't come to those who are born the fastest or the strongest or the richest. You share more with us now than ever before. Let me free you both from Topside and from the fates they've prescribed to you." The boy must have been used and tricked too many times before. He turned away from Silco and continued to emotionally reach towards Singed, who was like a distant planet. "Singed, please, don't hurt her," Victor asked, and the old scientist flashed a bit of sympathy. "Or, if you cannot at least ease the pain, do not make a choice she does not consent to. I allowed what was done to me. She has no say. Please, Singed. Doctor." Singed paused, and for a second Silco thought he was about to be a good man, but he shook his head and then gestured at Sevica. "Good. Just like Marcus. People will surprise you, but mostly they'll do exactly what you expect." The sun of hope had set. Victor's calls were being sent to the light of a star that had already died. Sevica raised an eyebrow, but somehow still understood what the disgraced doctor wanted from her, and the boy scientist was too obsessed with appealing to notice. He couldn't react in time to Sevica grabbing him from behind, and the second he was trapped, he helplessly tried to thrash. The doctor filled a syringe with a vicious-looking amber liquid that gleamed under the verdant hue of the laboratory. Victor strained again against Sevica, certainly realizing what was about to happen. "This is for your own sanity." Singed ignored the boy's pleas and plunged the device into his neck. Victor fought again, cursing them all as he slurred his words together. The older chemist only sighed at his apprentice's limp form in Sevica's arms. The device, the strange glowing core, sparked the life right as the boy faded into unconsciousness. So Singed hasn't only been indulging in sentimentality, always a purpose and a larger goal with this man. They moved the girl to the gurney and the boy back to the slab. Singed brushed a lock of the boy's hair out of his eyes. The gesture was not lost on Silco. "I remember you telling me you once had a daughter." Singed only shrugged. Of course he did. "How long will it take? How changed will she be?" Singed wheeled the device between the two dying scientists. "As much as you were. Perhaps more." Silco had faced down the abyss, and for that wisdom he had given his eye. The girl would have to travel to the world of death like he had. The similarities between them were intriguing, both betrayed as well. Good. She must let Powder die to become what she was meant to be. We are now switching to Vi. She was running with a half-dead enforcer in her arms. Crystals protruded from her flesh and cyborg-like biceps. Which of these scenarios felt more surreal to her? Vi couldn't articulate it, but the enforcer in her arms was probably the stranger of the two. The enforcer groaned, revealing to Vi that she had probably never been shot at in her life. Vi was struggling to swallow that this foolish enforcer had literally thrown herself in front of Vi to take a bullet for her. Hey, come on, Cupcake. She had started calling the uptight, polished detective that as an insult. The hint of her stomach warming when she said it, mixed with the terror of her strange companion not hearing it, did not speak well for her plans or for the term of endearment, unfortunately, still being an insult. That needed reminders that this woman was a tool for an endgame, one that would surely lead to the dissolution of their alliance? Friendship? She took a bullet for me. Were more frequent in Vi's head than she liked. You gotta tell me where to go. Caitlin, come on. Tell me where I need to go. She was 16 again, running through the beautiful streets of Piltover and yelling to Milo and Clagger that they had to turn back for Powder. The buildings were so high, and everything was reaching for the stars and leaving her behind. You left her behind again. That was the craziest part about her. Her sister had lived. Clagger, Milo, and Vi had watched the building concave, the walls exploding and rubble falling onto that hallway space where Powder had gone to explore. Vi had run back to the Undercity, in truth, to get Vander. A deep part of her had fantasized that Vander would march over the bridge and return with Powder or avenge Powder. Vi looked back to the sun gates, hoping that her sister had kept some of the magic in her, enough to survive another explosion. Enough that they'd get a second, technically third, chance to talk. Caitlin whimpered and then cried out. Vi had to cover the woman's mouth and pull them into what she thought was an alley. But to her surprise, it was a garden. It was manicured, a small patch of green in the empty sea of metal and gilded, gleaming copper worlds. The woman needed help that Vi couldn't give, not without a cost. Shimmer was a freedom wrapped in shackles. It had stopped the river toxins from killing Silco, fueled the tattoo and joint cybernetics in her arms, and now it might give Vi the time to get this woman to someone in Piltover who could fix her quickly and without the crude pains that came with the injury in the Undercity. Vi pulled a vial of refined shimmer from her left boot. The forbidden fruit gleamed menacingly. She gently laid the enforcer onto the grass, realizing that it wasn't real. Nothing ever was in Piltover, and that Silco would be laughing if he knew where she was. The bastard had always snipped at her for the irony she threw herself into. Oh, Violet, always so quick to scream obscenities at me for how I kept Marcus, the enforcer, close to me. I'm almost flattered you're following in my footsteps, or maybe in Vander's. He worked so well with Sheriff Grayson. He had only saved Vi and taken her in for his own gain. Silco had never made that a secret, no. That was one courtesy it did her. Silco, if anything, wasn't a liar, and she couldn't wait to bring his bullshit empire down around him. Vi uncapped the shimmer and poured it between the woman's lips. Fuck them all. She was going to recreate the world from the ashes of the entire city, and her sister would be there. Her sister would finally be there with her after that she saw the end of Vi's gambit. The shimmer had barely left the bottle before Caitlin started to weep. Vi knew from experience that was going to hit her system with a shock that could awaken sleeping titans. Still, she started to shush the enforcer and even squeezed her hand reassuringly. Vi had never had a partner before. She had been a sidekick and groomed to inherit the role of protector, but she was never an equal and never a companion. Even her sister had been one out of the many she had had to protect. Caitlin's eyes opened, and the amount of relief Vi felt was sickening. Where? It was all syllables and sounds that Caitlin could force her mouth to form. Piltover. Vi looked around at the garden in the quiet night air. She hadn't been in the city proper since she was 16. Most of her work with Silco kept her near Stillwater Prison and the sky-skiff docks near Piltover Edges. Vi wondered if this had been on purpose, if Silco had always known her sister was alive and had hired the scientist Victor as a plant in Piltover and Powder's jailer. Or was fate spitting in her eye again? We need to hurry to your council friend, or whatever connections you said you had. With anyone else, Vi would have added the addendum of, and if you were lying about your contacts, then you've killed yourself. Caitlin, forever full of surprises, said, Carry me. The house mansion was magnificent, grander than the Slick Jaws terrarium bar or the Vix Gang's secret apartment. Caitlin directed her past an open hold in the golden fence and through a gravel walkway that was surrounded by hedges. There's no guards here? Vi asked, and Caitlin shook her head in confusion. Or maybe half delirium from blood loss. The shimmer would keep her body breathing and producing enough fluids, but she needed the bullet removed if she was going to survive. Of course, she'll survive. We're in Piltover. Another theory entered her mind. What if her sister had been brought back from the dead by Piltover? They had taken Powder's corpse and reanimated it, brainwashed it, and made her their servant. How is this supposed to help you from bleeding out onto my hands, Caitlin? Dad. She coughed and failed to notice Vi's face twisting in shock. The enforcer was desperate enough to not lie. Medic. Caitlin looked to a servant's door in the back of the house. Vi knew it was for the employed masses that made the house run because it looked like the brown, plain wood was tacked onto the bronze estate as an afterthought. People like Vi to people like this? Always an afterthought. Always secondary. Vi shook her head. She was thinking like Silco again and jogged, jostling Caitlin, who winced towards the entrance. Vi began to put the pieces together. You didn't tell me your dad was a servant for a councilwoman. The door was flung open, and for the 100th time in her life, Vi was face to face with the end of a gun. At the helm of the weapon was an older woman, perhaps in her 50s or 60s. She was a Pilty in every regard. Clean white blouse with a navy bow tie at the collar, a full-length skirt that was as dark as her graying hair probably used to be. White gloves, gold buttons, and blue gemstone earrings. Following at the woman's heels was a man with darker navy hair and a face that was distinctly Caitlin-esque in nature. It suddenly clicked for Vi who these people were. The two parents looked at Vi like she was a lake monster who had their daughter in a bridal carry. They had no idea. Vi rushed past the woman who was too busy trying to cock the rifle and curse her out into the kitchen. Instinct and Silka's training took over as Vi yelled at the man, who she realized was Caitlin's father and the husband of one of the richest people in Piltover, to get his supplies and hurry. The father had some sense. He looked at his wife and then at his daughter. He made the right choice and ran up a set of stairs in the corner of the servants' area. His wife looked wrathful. You shimmer-riddled, undercity addict! What the hell have you done to my daughter? The woman kept trying to take Caitlin out of Vi's arms. Vi could have killed her with a hit to the jugular, the stomach, or the back of the cranium. Hello, nice to meet you too. Caitlin had literally nothing to say about you, but I'm sure if she did, it would be vague and mildly pleasant. Vi carried Caitlin to a table in the thankfully empty servants' quarters. It was too early for them to be here, it seemed. The woman kept trying to block Vi and point a gun at her. Can you move, bitch? Vi's pleasantries were fading fast. Excuse me? Mother. Caitlin groaned the admonishment out from on top of the table Vi had laid her on. Her dad was quickly there and telling her to hold on. Vi looked at her boots, tracing the lines of scuffs and scratches until she didn't have to watch this moment between daughter and father. The councilwoman finally turned her attention and wrath away from Vi when she realized that the Undercity woman wasn't going to give her any information and that she needed to take care of her daughter. The woman must have cared about Caitlin because her brow furrowed and she began to very quietly stroke her daughter's hair. She wasn't as apparent in her affection as the father, but it was still there in the faint hints that Vi had been taught to spot and target. Silco would have been proud of her. Vi pulled out a chair from somewhere, sat somewhere in the kitchen, and wished she was somewhere else. She looked towards the door and considered running, back to the bridge and back to her sister. What if this time she didn't make it? She had to have made it. Vi knew it. This wasn't like the last time. Caitlin would make it and so would Powder, and the rest of the city will burn. Vi caught her own reflection in the floors of the kitchen as Caitlin winced and made the pained noises of the brave attempting to hide their discomfort. A pink-haired woman with strange arms and crystals sticking out of her glared back at Vi from the floor. Silco's third, and the perfect match to Sevica, was there, still looking back, as always. Just because she found herself attached to someone didn't mean she had changed. Eventually, someone came to stand by her. It was Caitlin's father. He must have been as brave or stupid as Caitlin because he offered Vi a cloth with some herbal remedy on it. When she shook her head and tried to wave him away, unsure how to explain she had been treating her own wounds for years now, he began to lay at her feet various medical instruments and gestured to his wife for them to leave Caitlin and Vi. Vi was as shocked as the mom, but the posh counselor relented on the grounds that they'd be nearby if anything happened. Vi didn't say to them that Caitlin could be dead easily. If Vi willed it, she could do it, and nothing could stop it. She kept her mouth shut, though. When they were gone, she went to work getting the shards of crystal out of her body. How are you? Not in pain? Caitlin stared at the ceiling while she asked the question. Does she not remember the explosion? Vi had been taking shimmer since she was 17. Her arm alterations had been a gift from Silco when she was 18. Like Silco and Sevica, she had gained some benefits from the drug. The numbing power of Shimmer made every attack against her weaker and less potent. Unfortunately, it made every sensation less potent as well. Like she was behind a wall of smog and can only faintly feel the other side. I'm tough. You should have let my father get those things out of you. Caitlin turned to her, laid out on the table still, but seemingly better, and ignoring Vi's joke. Her voice was fainter, and there was still the evidence of shimmer in her from the ram substance at the corner of her eye. But she was alive. I know it's hard to ask for help, but this can only work if you trust me. The truth was that it never worked. Topside always found a way to screw her over. Caitlin couldn't understand that. I understand now. Topside has been the source of your problems. Not all of my problems. Or Vi, I'm not sure. That's my bad. She had done a fine enough job of causing trouble and ruining everything herself. Vi could still see Milo and Clagger's starry-eyed, wistful faces. They jumped when she said jump, listened when she had ordered them to listen, and they had died when she said to fight. Vi? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for showing me the Undercity. Thank you for saving me. Thank you for being my partner. Vi had taken her to spots where the firelights would tag buildings with graffiti, and then took her immediately to a neighborhood that was addicted to shimmer. The perfect story and villain wrapped into one. And in the moment of pure earnesty from Caitlin, Vi knew that when she died, she was going to the places where no soul wanted to be. The Tartarus pits waited for her, not in the fields of gold for heroes. At least Caitlin might be there too. Hell cared not for intention, only deed and execution. And if that was true, then most of Piltover was headed towards the same dark pit as Vi. I'm surprised my sister didn't show you. Vi was lying through her teeth. She covered this falsehood by shifting her eyes towards the removal of explosive crystals lodged where they weren't meant to be. Her sister had pulled the trigger and then thrown the bomb in the air. If powder had really meant to kill all three of them, she would have fallen on the sword and kept the device in her hands. Your sister had a hard time here, Caitlin began to say, and Vi had to bore her attention into her injuries to not feel an age-old resentment for Silco and Vander for ripping them apart. I wished I'd reached out to her sooner. She had Victor, though she wasn't alone, and neither are you. Vi felt her throat clench, and she could have breathed fire at that moment. How dare the universe try to forgive me, comfort me, like a unicorn that comes to lay in the lap of the no longer pure virgin. Caitlin, I'm not a good person. Vi. No, listen. Vi hadn't talked about this in 10 years. Technically, she had never talked about it ever. When I was 16, after powder was caught in that explosion, people came after us. Vi had looked into Vander's kind eyes, and he had told them to hide in the last drop. She had been so sure of him, of the Undercity, of the monsters and heroes, and of vengeance and retribution. The hiding went on for 3 days, and in that time her anger grew until it was a great plume that blocked out the sky. My brothers and I moved hiding places a few times, but then we chose the wrong place. Vander hadn't known what to do. It had seemed that the man who had saved her and Powder on the bridge from the enforcers had died alongside their parents. He had hung the gauntlets, still stained in places with traces of enforcer blood, over the bar like wind chimes, but they had always been only for show. It was an old game hall. It had a bunch of silly arcade sports that Powder used to love. But up until then, we hadn't gone because I'd been trying to get us to be more like adults. The plan had been simple in her mind. They'd lure the enforcers to the game hall, and there they could catch them off guard with a tar concoction that Echo had put together. Just like kids playing with slingshots, it had gone poorly and Marcus had started firing. 2 bullets, 1 for each of her brothers. When they came for us, we tried to fight, and of course we began to lose. I had these old gauntlets with me, and there was this woman. I struck her once, I'm not sure if my punch killed her on the impact of the floor. That was all it took. Then I ran. You were acting in self-defense. Caitlin was sweet, in a sort of naive way. My sister was alive the whole time, too. There was no reason for what I did, Caitlin. Vi hadn't even known it was the sheriff. That was then. This is now. Caitlin sat up from the table and seemed to defy her pain. You've worked to grow the Undercity and bring hope, despite Silco and the Firelights. The whole of the Undercity heard the story. Vi had killed an enforcer. Vi had killed the sheriff, and none of it mattered. She wandered the streets in a half-delirium of guilt, the faces of her brothers gone eerily still and unblinking. Silco must have heard the overinflated version of the events, but he had still had his people find her. Vander and Benzo had followed, and because of that, she had gotten them killed too. You know, one time Marcus said that we were all just small men who should have died in the forgotten slump hole we were born in. I sometimes think he was right. No. Caitlin moved to stand, ignoring Vi's protest all the way until she was kneeled beside her. I'm going to talk to my mother. We're going to the council, Vi, and we'll get the help we need to find your sister and stop Silco. It was all falling into place. Vi pulled another crystal from her knee. Promise? We're changing perspectives to Echo. Powder had given him the gift of time wrapped in the ribbon of bravery and an attempt at blowing her sister up. He was only able to realize that as he limped towards Piltover, trying to find a place where he could get some momentum for his board and escape the sound of the Foghorn Enforcer's alarm. The blast had thrown Echo off the railing where he was clinging for his life, and in slow motion, he had been surrounded by small motes of light, and the carnage had not seemed so terrible. He hadn't hit the water, but instead was thrown far enough that he had landed on hard concrete foundations near the shore. Scar was right. You're attached to a girl who you thought was the Blue Fairy, but she's more like a ship captain with a hook for a hand. This is what happens when you fancy yourself the boy who will never grow up. Before he had left, Scar had pulled him aside and laid it out plainly. The daughters of the house of Silco and Vander were cursed by something as old as Piltover and the Undercity. Echo tried to not turn back, but he kept wincing and glancing over his shoulder towards the bridge in the land of his home. But he had kept reasoning that he'd be of no use to her dead, ignoring the very reality that she was almost certainly gone. But you've thought that before, and she's come back. Echo fell into an alleyway and laid still as the sound of thundering enforcer boots rushed towards the explosion. Even Piltover had its place to hide, it seemed. How many lives can a Poro have? 9? She knew what she was doing. And yet, the memory of her suicidally throwing herself off the tower and into the hands of fate was a fresh memory. An account of his body and injuries followed up with shock, terror, fear, and one dislocated arm. To the gods, he was lucky. He was so lucky and so tired, and he let himself curl up for a second, telling himself he had the time. It felt like he had been alone for so long. Beyond the Undercity, resting on paved streets and hills of copper buildings who had unanimously nodded in architectural agreement, was Piltover's primary science and technology college. The minds who made what went on there was said to have been the best and toughest. It began its preparatory work with students around the ages of 16. If you survived the metaphorical culling, you were then ushered to the first year of study in the upper college and university systems. You could tell the ages and ranks of students, depending on uniform and tie color or skirt pleat type. Progress to Piltover meant following a codified dress code. Echo knew all of this because Benzo had once pulled him aside and delicately begun to describe the institution. How sometimes angels from topside came down to pluck hidden gems in the rough, but Echo had been small enough to still whine out a disgusted argument. He knew the old man had been trying to push him into a world that he believed would be better for Echo. Benzo had been kind to him for free. a rare thing in the Undercity, in Zon. Powder had said to go to the open skylight. Echo listened and began to move through the infant rays of morning light across perfectly clean streets and warm street lamps. Enforcers were moving in the opposite direction of him, and the city was either dead asleep or willfully ignoring the commotion. Where had Topside and Undercity begun? Before the Hex Gates, and even before the airships and blimps, the seas and the ports had been the dreams of the cliffside city. Echo knew this from his own research and into lost journals and tomes. It was the first building of the canal system. Every piece of the path had led to the Undercity entrenched in debts made of blood and gold to Piltover. There were guards patrolling the academy, but even with a dislocated arm, Echo only found them nominally a frustration. They were so full of themselves, and not even vaguely concerned with the fact that an explosion had just occurred near the sun gates. He took a breath and brought himself back to his goal, the skylight. He clipped his left boot to the retractable locking mechanism on the surface of his board and started to get some momentum from pushing himself along. He then kicked off and started to hover enough to grab onto the second-story window of what he assumed was a classroom. Immediately, as he began his climb, he realized that Powder wanted him to go for a glass dome at the apex of the building. He cursed and kept climbing, all the while ignoring the weird sensation in his arm. He was used to pain and powering through it, but that didn't make it any more enjoyable or less frightening. The gentle, early morning wind traced its hands against his brow and hair as he climbed higher. Legends in the Undercity said that a goddess of wind had come to protect them when the noxious fumes from Piltover's construction. Echo had seen graffiti tags of the goddess a few times. She was always dressed in really tight and revealing clothes that made him and Powder as little kids giggle and point. It was only him and the wind to watch over him at this great height. The firelights were almost all entirely orphans, and Echo wouldn't say any of them were necessarily religious, but it felt nice to believe that something was watching out for you. It was just on the horizon, rooting for you, and keeping your corner safe with fires alight. If he lived, he made a promise to himself that he'd go and change the murals of the goddess. No more skimpy outfits for Zon's protector. Echo made it to the top of the dome. His arm had started to pulse angrily at him, and looked out to the city. Even in the morning, dewy darkness, it was lit with Christological lighting. The hex gates also glowed like a halo against the ports they were built for. He didn't have to search for long to find the secret place where Powder frequented. The metal framing around the unlocked skylight had silly doodles of monsters and purple dragons. There was no more time for guilt. If Echo's estimations were right, he hadn't seen the last of Fire Powder. Life was fragile, but there was something destiny-like about the sisters. Scar was right. There was a curse on them. The sisters would die when the will of Zon and Piltover let them. It was weird, the paths and traces of time and fate. He saw them clearly, as a scientist, and maybe a little as a dreamer. Echo hovered easily through the skylight, like Powder had been waiting for someone to share this secret with and had marked an X on a treasure map. He kept expecting Hextech runes to suddenly glow and blast him out of the air, or poster boy Jace Talus to arrive and order his arrest to Stillwater. None of that happened, and he landed on the floor of a clean, sterile, blue and silver laboratory. This was where the issues arose. He needed Powder to help him in identifying necessary components. He could recognize objects of value and tools that could be good, but he wasn't taking technology indiscriminately. He only had so much weight that could be carried on his board. A click at the door interrupted his thoughts. Door unlocking. Individual will be in room in less than 2 seconds. He heard the footsteps, just in time, and ducked under the table. He brushed his arm against the leg of the furniture piece, though, and had to bite into his fist not to scream. It was times like this that he found himself resenting Vi the most. They had had enough clashes for him to know that the shimmer gave her advantages that the firelights could only dream of. Pain couldn't stop her, and that was a terrifying thing to behold. He watched the legs of the person enter. They were dressed in a lab and academy uniform of sorts. As the figure moved further into the room, Echo saw it was just a dark-skinned woman with her long and bouncy hair in a tight band. She was clearly stressed, rubbing her eyes and propping her glasses atop her forehead. She took a seat on a stool before a desk, and Echo felt the awkward sense that he was watching a very vulnerable scene that he had no right to. Then, the woman looked up, right at the open skylight area. "Powder," she called out. Echo was frozen. "Powder! Powder, are you there?" Echo weighed the odds that the scientist woman would find him. Very likely. He then weighed his ability to bluff and lie, potentially equally as likely. "Hi," Echo said as he stepped out from under the table. Shit, the woman almost fell from her chair when she saw him. Double shit. Echo decided to take a safe route. "I'm one of Powder's friends from the academy." He stilled his shaking hands and tried to think how he could explain his clothes. Even the safest route never worked with Powder, because the woman looked him up and down skeptically, but didn't comment on his dress. Instead, she said, "Powder doesn't have friends from the academy." She was wicked sharp for a Pilty. "Powder clearly trusted you enough to tell you about the skylight. If you're her friend, then you need to tell her to get out of the Undercity now." Typical, Echo should have known. He was disappointed, but not surprised. She rubbed her forehead again. "I'm from the Undercity too." And before Echo could make another remark, she opened her notebook and thrust it at him. In it were very clearly ripped pages of documents that had been hastily removed from their original place and thrust into her workbook. On each page was a stamp of a hammer in the middle of a diamond. It was the nightmare that Echo and even Silco had forewarned Zahn of. Hex-tech weapons. "Powder needs to return now. She's never been a great negotiator, but she had an equal part in Hex-tech's creation, and the council would listen to her." "Powder is as diplomatic as a rabid-tusked bantha." Echo, like an idiot, was compelled to have her on his mind, taking space and causing worry and fear at all times now that she was alive again. It was like a switch that had flipped in him, and he was 12 again, and having foolish hope, despite the evidence and repeated experiments of his life revealing over and over again the dangers, that it would all work out. Even if Powder got up there, they wouldn't listen. You know they wouldn't. Not to mention that enforcers had been hunting the firelights at Silco's command for years. The system was never meant for them. "Then why did she send you? Why are you here and not her?" "She wanted me to help her find Victor. She seemed to think that there was something here we could use, and in return I could keep the technology." He hid the fact that part of the reason was also stop Vi from whatever insane plan she was cooking up. Echo saw the flash of realization in the woman's eyes. "Someone in the Undercity is building a weapon too." Echo said nothing, and the woman realized everything. She cursed under her breath, something about Powder and Victor in her lament. "Whatever you take from this lab isn't leaving my sight. I can help you collect what you need, and then we're going to stop some super weapons." She trailed off towards the end of the sentence. Hearing herself must have not inspired confidence. He was skeptical. "How many years has it been since you were in the fissures? The lanes?" Her face scrunched. "That's what I thought." "We all have our part." The line had more weight to her than Echo. "Your arm." "Yeah, I know." She approached and he had no energy to fight her. "We could go to a doctor. Or I could." It was a half question. This proved to him she had probably been an orphan in the Undercity. He nodded at her and pretended she was Scar or Powder or a version of Vi long dead in the past. He only winced a little bit as she popped it back into place. It was shocking to see his pride not fail him when he needed it. Being from the Undercity didn't automatically equal friendship or solidarity, but he was glad that she had found him here. "What's your name?" It was a start, and unlike Powder, Echo knew he needed the help. "Sky." She began to collect her things. Powder had pulled something similar on him, realizing that he needed something and finding a way to simultaneously give it to him and get something else. Echo then watched her unlock a small safe under the desk, something Vi had missed when she had kidnapped Victor. "How did you get past the blockade?" Sky asked. Powder took care of it, but also kick-started 7 more problems. He had to laugh. Sky's deep brown eyes softened. You really are her friend. Moving into Caitlin's perspective. Her mother and her had these arguments often and always in the same place, the tea room. Above the fireplace was their family portrait. Her mother's parasol took up a significant splotch of the canvas, while Caitlin and her father stood at either side, painted as pillars of family. Their most lavish chairs were here, and any time they needed to talk as a family or have her mother lecture them all, they came to the tea room. Sometimes her father would side with Caitlin in the argument, but mostly he kept silent and only interjected sparingly. Caitlin swore that she wouldn't let this opportunity pass. Every time she stood up for her choices, every tiny rebellion and every little scrap of herself she could actualize had been leading up to this moment. The city needed healing, and this was her best chance at starting that long and arduous process. The first string of the great conspiracy had to be plucked first. That was Silco and his people. Then, those who allied with him or would seek to grab power would come next. Caitlin explained all of this to her skeptical mother and father, who looked on in horror at their daughter as they sat together in the living room. Her mother's immediate response was expected, and still disappointing though. I'm removing you from the Enforcer's Corp. It's too late. Caitlin had been threatened with this before. I'm on Jace's staff. You're failing to comprehend me, Caitlin. I'm not doing this as your mother. I'm doing this as a counselor. You and Jace have endangered the whole of Piltover with this espionage attempt to rescue the assistant, Victor. Caitlin was willing to give her mother an iota of credit. She did look repentant as she had clenched her hands. I understand Victor means the world to Jace. This rescue mission has evolved into more than that, though. There are reports that a weapon is being built in the Undercity, and its usage imminent. Things have escalated, and we are on the precipice of war. Do you even realize that you were present for an explosion that killed dozens of enforcers? Your safety is paramount, Caitlin. My safety? I've never been safe a day in my life here. These are citizens and good people of this city living on the streets, being poisoned, having to choose between a kingpin who wants to exploit them and a government who doesn't give a shit about them. Meanwhile, the Academy had custody of a child for a decade and never thought to look for her sister, despite the fact that she was a primary Hextech engineer and no one considered her in the ties she had because Silco and Marcus are hiding and puppeteering us. Cassandra Kierman had been on the Piltover Council even before Caitlin was born. Caitlin had grown up listening to stories of her mother's prowess and her dealings with House Tallis and Jace's father. Their family had their own mythology, and Caitlin was distinctly aware that she was being punished for defying the path set by that story. I want to speak to the council, tell them of my findings, and represent myself as part of House Tallis's staff. Her mother straightened her face. I'll schedule an audience. Caitlin tried to mimic her mother's expression, but covering up the shock was difficult. You and your friend, can address the council yourselves. I suggest you need to prepare accordingly. Sheriff Marcus is dead, and the council will want justice for the bridge massacre. It sounded affectionate and condescending simultaneously to her, the true duality of her mother in all ways. Good to know Vi didn't say anything about him trying to shoot her and me taking the bullet instead. Thank you. Caitlin almost ran to her room to tell Vi. She half expected the woman to not be there, to have fled in the minutes Caitlin was gone. In the brief time of their partnership, she had learned that the Undercity Revolutionaire had this ever-present dark cloud over her head. It came in hints and brief exchanges, the signs of a lonely woman. Vi was standing before the map Caitlin had built, almost dwarfed by the size of the canopy bed and the pillars in her bedroom. You did all of this? Caitlin was still in shock that her mother had so readily agreed to let them present, but she mustered a response. Yes, it was part of the reason I became an enforcer. Huh, And I thought Powder could get obsessed. Caitlin moved to stand by her. There was a childish thought at the back of her mind. What comes after this? Vi was an Undercity leader and Caitlin was an enforcer. The notions of partnership and a continued mutual understanding were intoxicating. She had been alone for so long. Your sister is brilliant. I don't think the city would have the Hex Gates without her or Victor. I left her. There it was, the dark cloud. No, what happened wasn't your fault. It was like Vi and her sister had simply been born unlucky. Tonight, we present our findings to the council, and then we can get the tools necessary to rescue Victor from Silco and find your sister too. She has to be somewhere close by in the lanes. Vi brushed her knuckles against Caitlin's hand and they rested until they were called for. When Caitlin and Vi walked in the council chambers, an imposing building that had a circular table arrangement with divots for the seats, they caught the tail end of the conversation between the counselors. Marcus was dead via an explosion, blood on the bridge, firelight crystallological technology had advanced from a nuisance to a weapon. Jace tried to get the last word and made it exactly clear what he was thinking. We need to act before anyone else gets killed or kidnapped. Counselor Salo, a reed-thin man with slicked backed blonde hair, interrupted that attempt. All right, your assistant. And how do we know for certain he hasn't gone rogue? The only person capable of creating a weapon like this would be him. Jace dropped an orange crystal he was running between his hands. Salo ignored the malicious glare Jace threw at him. Caitlin hadn't been able to see Jace before she had departed for the Undercity. In such a short time, the stress from his missing friend and now the deaths on the bridge had touched his psyche. Caitlin could see it, and its layers became apparent to her when she realized he had 3 sets of crystals before him that were similar to the ones Vi had been removing from her arms. Caitlin could hardly remember the explosion, only the gunshot, and then Vi. A firelight rogue had jumped onto the bridge and my memory goes fuzzy. I know it was a woman. I know she tried to attack us. Vi hadn't mentioned a word of it to Caitlin, and she wouldn't make eye contact as they listened to the council debate. Finally, Caitlin's mother called them to testify before another word could be said. From the floor and balcony above, the great meeting desk looked like a gear with intensely sharp angles and wedges. When someone came before the council, they walked down a narrow path and in between a small break in the circle's band. That way, they were in the center of the gear and effectively surrounded. Caitlin turned to Jace and a bit of relief passed between the two. Vi, who she knew to be good at speaking, had gone immensely quiet. Caitlin stepped forward for the both of them. Dressed her in her enforcer's uniform to establish ethos, she began. Counselors, this is Violet. She is known by her followers as Atlas and has lived in the Undercity her whole life. We have failed her, and countless others. As a result, Vi is one of the many who have risen up against the industrialist Silco, but one of the few to truly become a needed leader among the Undercity. The whispers that followed were not what she was expecting. The counselors were ogling Vi's cybernetic arms, whispering of Shimmer and the barbarity of it all. She risked everything to show me the crimes of the Firelights and ravagings of Shimmer and the ploys of Silco. What does this Silco even want? Jace looked to Counselor Medarda before turning his attention to Caitlin. Wait, where's Heimerdinger? He was one of the more sympathetic persons on the council to the Undercity. He had started the program that had found Victor and brought him to Piltover. Without him here, Caitlin felt their chances of success dwindling. This is where it became tricky. Caitlin had verbally convinced them that a compromise could be made where Vi could be given official support from the council to lead the Undercity. Like Vi, he wants the Undercity to be independent. He calls it the Nation of Zon. But unlike Vi, he's a tyrant who would destroy both the Undercity and Piltover to get what he wants. In my short time there, and having the experience of a counselor's daughter, I realized that there needs to be some form of representation for the other half of our city. If independence cannot be achieved, then an expansion of leadership can be found in the same way that Jace sits on this council to represent Hextech and the continual safeguarding of Hextech. They weren't listening. Jace sat forward. Caitlin, I asked you to find Victor in the Hex Gyms. What conclusions have you made? He wasn't sounding like her childhood friend. They've changed him. In such a short time, too. Maybe he was always like this, though. We believe Silco is holding him. Caitlin took a deep breath as she spoke. Good. Then we go to the Undercity. I'm tired of us waiting. Jace began to stand. We have the Hex Tech, and we have the power to stop them. Being bystanders implicates us as culpable in all of this. Caitlin could feel the negotiations slipping. They were going to storm the Undercity, and good people down there would be hurt. We also believe the Firelights have been forcing him to produce weapons. The modified crystal bomb on the bridge is evidence of that. Jace shook his head. No, he wouldn't. He's stronger than that. He would never build a weapon under coercion or force. Counselor Hoskell, a round man who was balding, interjected. Then who? Who from the Undercity would have had the education or the mental means to create such a thing? The memory is so fragmented. All I feel is pain from the gunshot. But Vi protected me from the blast. Who was there? Why didn't she tell me who she spoke to? Smoke and crystals were all she could sense and feel. In the sea of orange and green and yellow, there had been one color that stood out. Blue. Sister. There's always a choice. Caitlin heard it clear and rang true as her stomach fell out with a realization. Wait. Vi finally spoke like a gentle roll of thunder. Silco owns half the Undercity. I want to help you. I do. But I have to take care of my people. She was a rising star, truly. What the people of the Undercity fear more than Silco is Hextech. If Silco is brought down by Hextech and the Council alone, it will spark rebellion. She's protecting Powder. Vi continued in her gentle and vibrant speech. With the Council's permission and Jace Talis' aid, I want to be deputized as an Undercity enforcer. Counselor Medarda narrowed her eyes. Why? It was the first time the normally prolific speaker had interjected. Caitlin is a good... Hells, she's a great enforcer. Yet the second she entered the city, the people obstructed justice, not because they wanted to, but because they were afraid of her, and afraid to be labeled as a traitor by Silco. I've established a face and a name. The people of the lanes and the fissures know me. With Counselor Talis at my side, we could root out Shimmer and maintain peace between the Undercity and Piltover. The counselors shared looks with one another. It was somehow a sound solution and played into everything they wanted. Only one of them shook their head. The building of Hextech, artillery, and weapon sciences was to protect the city as a final recourse. The usage of it immediately is not, and was never, our intention, said Mel Medarda. Vi's eyes flashed purple. With all due respect, Counselor, weapons can't be unmade. They're almost always used, and that's what Silco's planning to do, immediately. Something in the air had shifted, and for the first time ever, Caitlin saw one of the Council's strongest members shaken. She looked at Jace, but he was staring at the crystals on the table. Jace broke his silence. She's right. Heimerdinger's inaction in the path we are on can't be deviated from. I'd like to put forward a vote to give Vi the Atlas an official title and role as Undercity Enforcer. They all began to nod. The speed in which everything was happening took Caitlin's breath away. A tug in her chest, unexpected, and suddenly panicked, told her that this was wrong. Something was wrong. The lights went out, and as each counselor raised their hand, a spotlight shone on them, illustrating their votes in favor of Vi. Only Mel Medarda voted against the choice. Vi! Caitlin yelled after her. After the vote, Vi had nodded to Jace and then begun to leave. Wait! Vi! Caitlin's mother hadn't looked directly at her when all was said and done. This was a sensation of a missing link in a case or a mystery that she now realized she hadn't even known existed. A heavy rain had started in the time since they had entered the council's quarters. Where are you going? To meet with Talis. It's time to finish this. Caitlin had only known this woman for a brief period of time, and the truth of that stung. What about Powder? Vi froze. What about my sister? She turned back to Caitlin, and they were suddenly close enough to see each other's fogs of the breath in the cold rain. There was a threat between them, the first time Caitlin felt a danger talking to her. I know she attacked us on the bridge. It was Firelight technology she was using too, Vi. Please, you can't make a deal with the council with this still in the fray. If Jace learns she was involved. He won't. Vi continued, walking away from her, from what they'd just accomplished together. Vi, I brought you here. You showed me the Undercity, and I brought you to the council like I promised. You can't just leave me. You need to go home, Caitlin. Vi looked down at her shoes. The rain left the sounds of the night drowned out. You're safe now. I'm going to find you again. Caitlin had staked everything on this. Her career, her dreams, her affections. I found you once. Caitlin wasn't a believer in the supernatural. It was hard to be even interested in the otherworldly, in the city of progress. Yet it was something childish and foolish that kept her reaching for Vi, telling her it had relations to fate and more. Vi had always surprisingly and a little too terrifyingly laughed. And then she cupped Caitlin's chin and knocked their lips together. It wasn't chaste, sweet, or delicate like the many kisses Caitlin shared with other women in the years since she was a teenager. It almost hurt. When they broke away, they stood there in the rain like fools. But Vi's eyes flashed purple, like a memory had come to the surface, and she began to turn away again. You couldn't even find Victor, Cupcake. She started to walk off again. She stopped, and she might as well have skewed Caitlin through the chest. Your mom talked to Pretty Boy Talus. You're not an enforcer anymore. Sorry. You're a real good champ, but I don't want to see the end of that story. Vi wouldn't relent. My recommendation to you? Things are about to change, and you don't want to be caught in the crossfire. Stay safe and stay away from me. You can afford it. Caitlin could only watch her leave in the night. I think we're getting to our last perspective of Jace. The first cast of the hammer needed 9 arcane runes and a single hex gem to power it. The hilt would have a steel core with 3 runes in the center. It was simple and gigantic, but the end result would function fantastically. The head of the hammer would be dubbed the Mercury Cannon. On the walls and workbenches rested the others, the Hex Claw, the Storm Grenade, the Atlas Gauntlets, to be wielded by the first Undercity Enforcer and named after her, the Hextech Revolver, and the Hextech Gunblade. The revolver had been built for Caitlin, but unfortunately it would not see proper action with her. It was a shame. But Jace agreed with Cassandra Kiraman after the bridge incident. It wasn't safe for her anymore. So you're off to play vigilante, Mel had encouraged him, funded his work, and with her nothing had felt impossible. Have you ever seen war, Jace? This wasn't right. This isn't war, Mel. This is a rescue mission. You heard the council. They all believe in this strategy. Mel looked over the workshop and clasped her hands together. When I was a young girl, my mother used to tell me of a story of her father playing a game with her. After the Battle of Hildana, he offered her a gold coin for every valuable piece of metal she retrieved from a fallen soldier, medic, or woman and child. Simultaneously, my brother used to lecture me that war was a failure of the statecraft. From these stories, I tried to make myself into a creature bold and clever. I dreamt of being both a wolf and a fox. Mel moved towards the molten casting that was filling the arcane runes. She looked upon his works, and instead of jubilation, he saw despair in her face. That was not enough to save the many I have seen fall in my lifetime, though. You asked me to make these. He never wanted to see her look at him or his creations that way again. We were doing this to save Piltover. Are we still? Mel could crumble his resolve with a single look. Would your partner, Victor? He's in captivity and being accused by the Council of treason. The bomb on the bridge had left them all in shock. Yet in his heart he had always known it would come to this. He knew that it was powder. The traces of the engineering left behind, alongside her strange disappearance, and the reports that had been coming in from Marcus before his death. They painted a picture of deception and lies that all came back to that girl. It had always been her, really. The explosion in his apartment had been her, so why not this too? An Undercity Enforcer is what we need. Even Heimerdinger had hoped we could safeguard Hextech somehow, and I think this is the step. You didn't see what I saw in that woman's eyes. The shimmer? She's addicted, but... No. Mel appeared at a loss for words, a terrifying thing to behold. She is playing a longer game with us. This is something all too convenient. A hand ran along the hanging wrenches by the door. Mel and Jace both hadn't realized that Vi was there, and an awkward tension arose. I'm sorry you think that. Violet moved into the light and slipped her hands easily into the Atlas gauntlets. She flexed the gargantuan fingers, testing them out. The blue light of the gauntlets shined against her face and eyes. She had the same expressions as Jace had when he had first worked with Victor on Hextech, intoxicated and reverent. This so people notice you when you raise your hand in the boardroom? Mel looked on at Violet with a distant and cold gaze. Jace stepped forward with an explanation. We'll be ready in 24 hours. Vi nodded. Good. There's a shimmer refinement plant near the docks. If they're holding your friend Victor somewhere, then that's the place. I'll head in first. Wait for my signal, and you and your crew can come in. Vi looked right at Mel. I'll leave you two to your conversation. It wasn't much more. Mel never wasted words. Come back alive. She left to go string the world together some other way. I've come to... Whatever she was going to say, she held herself aloof. I wonder which of us is more the fool here. Mel's words clung and haunted him as he and the 10 enforcers rode the armored train car to the Shimmer refinement plant. Vi had told him where to hide and had said that she and her people would be bringing in reinforcements. The second his boots were on the ground in the building of hundreds of catwalks and purple smog, he was ready. Mel's voice was gone, and all that mattered was the white counselor's uniform he wore and the weapon in his hands. But power and control were only a light switch away. The light source was pulled somewhere, and either some or all had known they were coming. Heavy footsteps began to flee from the enforcers as a stampede erupted in the facility. He heard enforcers' screams and the swift breaking bones and piercing of flesh. The blue light of his mercury cannon only made it so that he could not see a foot in front of him. And Jace felt fear he had never truly known until known. He swung randomly in the darkness, and then when the panic hit a crescendo, he activated the cannon and began to shoot. I will not be made a fool of. You don't understand what's at stake. Heimerdinger and the council had put him on trial and now begged him for Hextech. The ethos is clear. He must be banished from Piltover. My son had always chased an impossible dream. His own mother hadn't believed in him. Congrats on becoming officially the god of Piltover. Let me know when it's time for us to do our daily prostrating before your shrines. And then there was Powder. He had done everything to try and reach her, but she had rejected him and undermined him often enough that his relationship with Victor had been strained. When he saw the blue lights of the Hex Gem, all he could see was her hair and her needling laughter running circles in his head. Jace screamed with each blast hitting targets indiscriminately. He fell to his knees as Strike hit a close combatant who fell backwards into darkness. With a heavy knock, the lights came back on, and he had to shield his eyes. Jace panted with exertion, his vision clearing before him. Life drained and gone was a boy of no more than 14, dressed in ratty construction and mining overalls. There was no clear source of injury except the steam rising off the boy. Jace rose to his feet shakily and looked around at the other smoldering corpses. Bile rose to his throat and he began to retch. I guess this is your first time you're seeing one of the trenchers you've killed. Sliding down the railings and banisters of the plant and landing with a heavy thud, Vi arrived. She was smug and immediately Jace knew he had made a terrible mistake. I know. Hey, don't look so sad, Pilty. You've been inadvertently the cause of probably hundreds of teenagers' demises. Mel was right. He needed to get out now, but the lights had become painfully bright. He was like a bug under the microscope. Yeah, she was. It had been a long time since someone has seen through my bullshit like that. She began to circle him, the Atlas gauntlets thrumming and whining in her hands. Do you know what a hero cult is, Talus? It's sort of the opposite of what happened to my sister. See, When she died, when she was no more than 12 years because you saw nothing wrong with leaving hazardous technology laying around your apartment, she became a martyr after that, worshipped for the sole act of dying. The spotlights came up, and Jace looked to see that the catwalks of the refinement factory were filled with people. People who had just watched him murder a boy and potentially some of their friends. He and Vi were on the lowest level of the plant, like a stadium or a coliseum arena. Bodies littered the battlefield, and Mel's haunting words returned. Vi was getting closer. After I killed Grayson, the Undercity started calling me Atlas, exalting my heroics. Sort of like Vander on the bridge, but you wouldn't know him. What the hell are you talking about? Jace could tell she was rambling off ancient words. In a way, my sister can thank you for her martyrdom, and soon I'll have you to thank for the continued life of my hero cult. The world has forgotten Grayson, but they'll never forget the man of tomorrow who didn't leave to see the dawn. She rushed him then. The gauntlet struck the hilt of his hammer, and through sheer luck and quick thinking, he was able to knock off her fists and jump back. Put a good show for the crowd, Talus. You're famous down here. Everyone knows the man who found yet another way to leave us behind. Vi clanked the fists together, generating sparks of bright blue light. The crowd above cheered for blood. She's performing. It had been a long time since he was the underdog. He spun the mercury cannon twice, going for her legs. He struck once, but instead of knocking her down, she used the inertia to spin in the air and land on the gauntlet's hands. Nimble, like an acrobat, she propelled herself forward and tackled him to the ground. He never had a chance. Having never been trained in fighting, he was woefully unprepared. She had the audacity to flick him with the thumb and index finger of the gauntlets, and it was enough to break something in his nose. She was on top of him now, straddling him. Sorry, Talus. I would love to make this more of a thing, but we don't have the history for that. She raised both her fists in the air, her intent clear to crush his skull, and the audience's cheers were deafening. He thought of Mel. He thought of Victor. He thought of his mom. He thought of Heimerdinger. Shockingly, he even thought of Powder. A loud boom stopped the descent of Vi's gauntlets. She didn't react, like the shot to her shoulder had done nothing. She only angrily looked into the darkness where the treachery had spawned. 10 out of 10, toots. Out of the shadows, blue braids and half-cracked glasses that framed strange purple eyes, was Powder, wielding a crude pepperbox pistol. Hey, Jace. Sorry about my sister. And you thought I was crazy, huh? And that, my friends, was the end of the last intermission. Woo! My voice is wrecked right now from it, but that was some good stuff. More and more and more. I think it was here to pull all of these strings together to get to our last section. But I'll leave it here. I won't go too crazy into it, so I appreciate you all for making it through to the end of the video. Make sure to stay beautiful, stay hydrated, and we'll see you in the next chapter. Bye.